Okay, so welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are accessing this webinar from. Welcome on behalf of Cape Royal Tropical Institute and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. My name is Ewen Leborgne. I'm a Knowledge Management and Communication Advisor at Cape Royal Tropical Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webinar on the topic, Changing the Terms of Women's Engagement in Cocoa and Coffee Supply Chains. Before I explain the agenda for this webinar, a few technical things to mention about your Zoom experience. The first is that we really expect everyone, all the participants, to actually remain muted almost throughout the entire webinar, except during the question and answer session if you would like to express yourself. And when you want to do that, we will get to that again when it comes, but there is a button to mute or unmute yourself at the bottom of your Zoom window. When that Q&A time comes, we will also invite you to basically raise your hand to mention that you have a question. And for this, you can actually, you can find that option in the Participants tab. Just press, click on it, and then you will see an option to raise hand. And I would just like to give it a try. If you could, if any of you could try and raise your hand to see if it works. That would be really appreciated. So, okay, we see some people have tried. At least we'll have 3 participants in the Q&A, so that's a great start. Hopefully more. Remember, next to participants, you can find that option. In any case, if all of the above fails, we can always invite you to also share your questions by text using the chat window. For reasons of bandwidth, we are also keeping the video out, except for the speakers, for the presenters. And this is a live experiment. It's a bit of a tryout also, so please be patient and supportive with this experience. One of the implications is that we, despite numerous attempts, we're still not entirely sure that one of our speakers will actually be able to join us, but we're doing our utmost to make it happen. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be shared afterwards with everyone. And so on this note, I just want to let you know what the agenda will be. So when I am done talking, we will hear Martha Osorio from FAO give us a short introduction to this webinar series, this particular webinar, as well as the project and publication that these are related to. After which, we will hear a short presentation of some highlights from the publication by Becca Morahan, who is currently freelance but has been formerly working with TWIN, one of the key organizations involved in the project. And then we will host an interview of Joyce Poku-Marboah from Kookoo, and hopefully from Peter Ndambiri from SMS ECOM, followed by a question and answer session with all of you. And we will finally hear some final steps and next steps and thank yous from Laven from Cape Royal Tropical Institute. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Martha to get us an introduction to this webinar series. Martha, over to you.
Thank you, Ewan. Okay, welcome to everybody, and thank you for your interest in participating in this webinar. As Ivan said, I am Martha Osorio. I work in the Food and Agriculture Organization as a Gender and Rural Development Officer. So before entering into the substance of the webinar, let me introduce to you the context in which this activity takes place. So in 2016, FAO, the Royal Tropical Institute, KIT, and TWIN established a partnership to build on their respective and complementary knowledge, expertise, and comparative advantage in gender in agriculture and value chains generally, and in coffee and cocoa specifically, to put in place the Cocoa and Coffee Initiative. Based on the assumption that women and men participate in the production, processing, marketing of coffee, but that women do not really grasp the benefits that derive from their engagement, the initiative aims at fostering gender equitable value chains, while at the same time transforming the gender relations at different levels. So that is at the household, community, institutional, and market level. So now, why we started working on coffee and cocoa? In reality, there is a variety of actors in both sectors that have manifested their interest in working on gender issues, but more importantly, they have also adopted measures for promoting gender equality and empowering women as a way to increase their benefits and ensure their future sustainability. So there is there a business case. In addition, evidence shows that there are good practices in both sectors regarding gender innovative approaches, and these good practices can be shared and promoted. Also, because women face similar issues and constraints in both chains, and as well as the different actors involved. So there is scope for mutual learning and cross-fertilization among sectors and actors. So within this context, the initiative so far has, let's say, the three main objectives. The first one is the identification and systematization of the gender innovative approaches, strategies, and good practices. The second is the creation of a space in which the stakeholders can exchange their knowledge and experiences, but also to collaborate and partner among them. And finally, the third objective is related to the enhancement of the gender-related capacities of the different actors so that they can uptake and scale up the good practices. Since the partnership was was established, 4 activities have taken place. So we started in 2016 with an international multi-stakeholder consultation on gender-sensitive cocoa and value chains. This consultation was carried out in Rome, and it brought together about 50 participants from producer organizations and cooperatives, multinational companies, traders, service providers, academia, and government, to share their experiences and their knowledge, and also to shape the future work in this area. So at the end of this event, basically the participants manifested the necessity of getting more knowledge about the good practices, the importance of really providing more information and systematizing good practices. And so this paved the way to the second initiative, that was a workshop that we carried out in 2017 in Amsterdam. So basically there, 8 participants from organizations that attended the international multi-stakeholder consultation engage in a process in which in 2.5 days workshop, they shared their cases and they did an in-depth reflection on the constraints, opportunities, and the approaches implementing the gender approaches that they were implementing. So this basically information was then systematized by the 3 organizations, FAO, KITA, and Twin, with the support of the case holders. And the result or the outcome of this process, that was the third activity, that is the third activity, is the publication. The publication entitling Changing the Terms of Engagement in Cocoa and Coffee Supply Chains. This publication was released in July this year, and this webinar actually is the official launch of the publication. I would like to recall that this webinar is the first of a series of 3 webinars. We will talk about that at the end. And so the next 2 webinars will take place next year during the first quarter. So I would like also to acknowledge the important participation in this webinar, and also take the opportunity to say that the long process for releasing this publication was in reality the participatory nature, that the really participatory nature through which this exercise was done. So now I will give the floor again to Ewan, and I take the opportunity to say that he is our facilitator and communication, although he already said it, but Ewan, the floor is yours.
In communication, it's always a good idea to repeat, so thank you for that, Marta.
Thank you.
So I'm actually going to hand over the floor to Becca Morahan, who is going to actually talk about what we're really here for, which is this webinar and the publication that is related and that bears the same title, Changing the Terms of Women's Engagement in the Cocoa and Coffee Value Chain. So Becca Morahan is a consultant working on gender in value chains. She has worked as an associate at Twin, which was a partner of this initiative, for many years. She has particular experience working with household methodologies and working on women's integration in cooperatives, as well as documenting best practices. Becca?
Thank you, Ewan. Thank you everyone for being here. Yes, I'm really happy to tell you a little bit more about the publication. So our idea was just to introduce it and hopefully inspire you to read it or take a look if you haven't already. First, I wanted to say something about the title, why we called it Changing the Terms of Women's Engagement in Coffee and Cocoa Supply Chains. So I think we're all aware that women play a really valuable role in these value chains already, but their work is not always recognized or seen or valued. And so I think our interest is in approaches which really change the way that women engage so that they can obtain real benefits from their engagement. And the publication, yes, it maintains this comparison between coffee and cocoa experiences. So in the Right Shop, which Marta referred to, we paired actors from the coffee and cocoa sectors who had similar areas of experience so that they could share with each other and compare. And I think this really added to the richness of the analysis. It made us kind of dive deeper into each case. And so this is reflected in the publication, that they are presented in pairs with similar areas of experience and also important differences. It reflects the composition of the groups. I think something we found exciting about the Right Shop event was that it was an opportunity to have an in-depth conversation with actors from different levels of the chain. So traders, producer organizations, companies, service providers, and we don't often get the chance to talk, around a table with each other and compare experiences in that way. So this is also captured in the publication. It tells the story of each intervention. So something we were really interested in capturing in the Right Shop was not only the results, but also what the process had been and how each actor had arrived at those results. So we in a sense invited each participant in the Right Shop to tell the story in their own words, and we tried to capture that feel in the way that the publication, the way it's expressed in writing. We also analyze the lessons, and we think about how those approaches can be applied in other contexts. There's a small section on the business case, so we wanted to, obviously that comes up throughout, but we wanted to focus on that in one short chapter. So we look at all of the interventions from that perspective, and we also draw some overall conclusions about what's needed going forward. So we'll hear hopefully from at least from one of the participants that were in the Right Shop today. We're really fortunate to have them here with us. But I just wanted to mention what other cases are covered in the publication itself. So we have 2 that are looking at women's integration in producer organizations, quite different experiences, one from Latin America and one from West Africa. So we have a coffee and cocoa cooperative in Peru, Pangoa, that's in a sense been sort of retrospectively integrating women. It was set up very much by men, and then they've since then been integrating women. And then we compare that with an experience that Twin had of creating with farmers a new organization in Sierra Leone and thinking about how you integrate women from the start. We have two cases which look at this fundamental issue of women's access to land, and there are two organizations in different contexts, Poku-Marboah in Ghana, which is a cocoa organization, and Mzuzu Coffee in Malawi, that have taken quite a similar approach of encouraging land sharing between members of the household and between couples in order to allow women to join producer organizations in their own rights. We look at a couple of examples using a household approach, so looking, addressing directly household gender dynamics, and in particular the impact that that's had on productivity, quality, volumes of delivery. So those two organizations are Hansa Neumann Stiftung, particularly looking at their work in Uganda, although they work globally, and Sustainable Management Services, which is part of ECOM in Kenya. So hopefully we'll hear from Peter today more about that experience. And then last but not least, we had two multinational companies, well-known companies, which have done really innovative work in thinking really practically and sort of laterally, in a sense, about how they reach women farmers through extension. And part of that has been actually thinking about how to have more women agronomists or women lead farmers, which is something I think everybody wants, but sometimes we don't quite know how to go about it and how to overcome those barriers. So we look at their innovations in that area. So we just wanted to share some conclusions. These are not sort of definitive conclusions. These are just reflections, I think, of the group at the end. But having, explored in depth these different interventions, we all agreed that addressing intra-household gender relations is really important in order to achieve the kind of change that we're looking for in women's engagement in coffee and cocoa, but that of itself that's not enough, and that we need to be working at different levels, producer organization, company, service provider, and that although these are all related and they inform and support each other, changes at different levels don't automatically translate to the other. And so we need to, for systemic change, we need to keep working at all levels. Interestingly, yeah, we concluded that both bottom-up and top-down approaches have value. So bottom-up, we conceived of, sensitization, changing gender norms at the household, the community level. But top-down approaches such as, companies' policies, for example, that, having a quota that they want a certain percentage of field officers or agronomists or women on their board, the role of certifiers, that also really has value and kind of creates a frame and an incentive for change. We also reflected on the fact that I think often when we talk about gender and value chains, we think mainly about, what's happening at origin within producing communities, but actually system change in this, this is a global issue, and that we're all grappling with it, and that we need to be walking the walk and, having an internal reflective practice within our organizations and within our companies at every level for that change to really go to scale. We discussed again, that there are changes which take longer. So, for example, around this issue of land, it can take time to develop a land policy, to actually, pass it into law and then to implement it, but that we don't need to wait for these bigger changes, the bigger picture changes to take place, that we can all think about how we can be agents of change, for example, the examples that we'll hear today, and that good practice is a fantastic resource for advocacy for change. And it sounds obvious, but women's voices and perspectives must be at the heart. I think this is crucial that, still we need to listen more. We need to make sure that women are really at the heart of, intervention design, program design, and that there's still a lot of room for, for progress around women's leadership. There's been fantastic approaches developed globally, but there's more, there's more that needs to happen around really ensuring that women's voices are heard and that they're represented at every level. We talked a lot about scaling up, and that this can take different forms. It can be about, developing really effective peer sharing at a local level. It can be about institutionalizing a gender focus, but that it always requires adaptation to context, and that it's, I think we all know this, but it's never about sort of taking one approach and sort of being able to replicate it exactly in the same way everywhere, and that even within the same region or the same country, there can be important variances that we need to take into account in gender norms in order for those approaches to work. And finally, yes, given the complexity and the sort of multifaceted nature of these issues, that knowledge sharing across value chains and also at different levels within these chains is really important, which is part of what we're hoping to do with this initiative. So yeah, that's it. I just had, the pleasure of introducing the two people that we're going to be hearing more from now. So we have Joyce Poku-Marboah from Poku-Marboah. Joyce is the business development manager and the gender focal person at Kookoo. So Kookoo is a cocoa producers organization in Ghana, and it has grown exponentially since it was established. And the main focus, there's a lot of work they're doing on gender, but the particular focus of the case, which is in the publication and also that we're going to hear about today, is a really bold move that they made. They changed their registration requirements so that as a man, if you want to join the organization, you actually you're required to put some of your land in your wife's name so that she's also able to join. And this was coupled with more intense training and sensitization on gender, and it's been really effective, and the percentage of women is growing. It's gone from 11% to 35%. So Joyce will tell us more about this experience, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to Peter too. Peter Ndambiri is the sustainability manager at SMS ECOM in Kenya. It's part of ECOM. They have been working on gender for 10 years now, and since 2014, they've been implementing GALS, Gender Action Learning Systems, and they've integrated that into their good agricultural practices training. So some of the lessons from that case is that it's really been a win-win, that it's been a cost-effective way of expanding their reach with the GALS training, but also it's really strengthened the quality of the GAP training and its effectiveness in terms of adoption, and also that they've seen that working on these gender dynamics at a household level has really increased women's motivation to invest in coffee. So I just wanted, I think the next slide gives us, yes, I just wanted Peter, if we hopefully can hear from him, is likely to talk about GALS and the impact for anybody who's not familiar with it. I just wanted to give a very brief explanation. So GALS is Gender Action Learning Systems, which is one of a series of what are called household methodologies. So it's defined as a community-led empowerment methodology, and it works with women and men. And it works, for individuals, for households. It also can catalyze change, looking beyond, at an organizational level and also beyond in the wider community. And also it can be used in the value chain for discussions at different levels. It works, it's very accessible and engaging. It works through drawing and diagrammatic tools and other popular learning approaches, songs and role play. And its aim is to support families to develop visions and plans and for the future, to have conversations in the family about what they want, and to identify themselves what are the gender constraints that are holding them back and what they can do to take action to address those. So there's a website reference there actually for anybody who's interested. Game Change Network has more information about the GALS approach. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll pass back to Ewan, who will hold our discussion with Joyce and with Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becca, indeed, for this presentation. So now comes the moment of the leap of faith, the moment of truth, whether we're going to have Peter join us. This is, I guess, a moment of universal experience online where we are. Peter, can you hear me? Are you there? So let's just see if this works. We're trying to get Peter on using another system. Peter? You can hear us. Can you?
Can you even talk louder?
I can hear you very well.
Joyce, can you hear Peter?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can hear him saying, I can hear you.
This is progress. Martha, can you hear what Peter is saying?
She's muted.
Okay.
It's Martha there.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So it sounds like we can actually give it a go, which is really great. Thank you, Peter, for bearing with us and going through this. So my first question is actually for you, Peter, and Becca just ended the presentation of the publication with GALS. And I'd like to ask you if you could describe a little bit how you implemented this gender action learning system in sustainable management services in the coffee chain in Kenya, and also particularly what has been the impact of your approach?
Thank you very much for letting me into this webinar. I'm excited to share with the audience how we implement the gender action learning system at sustainable management services, together with our 6,000 smallholder farmers who SMS is offering coffee marketing services for. SMS implemented girls as a household approach, basically to build better gender relations starting at the household level, where most socialization and decision making takes place. In Kenya, basically coffee is produced by very smallholder farmers who own about maximum 1 acre piece of land. So you'll find probably each has about 250 feet. So for SMS, girls was an approach that we used for men and women because they could relate to them more easily and was less confrontational compared to probably other gender mainstreaming methodologies that probably start at another level. And again, girls was able to bring sense to men and women that gender does not mean women. It was introduced to the cooperative leadership. The approach was introduced to the cooperative leadership and the promoter farmers who are training other farmers on wood agricultural practices. And after they were introduced to girls, many of the board members and promoter farmers made decisions or the need to involve the women in coffee marketing. So SMS amplified the way of integrating gender action learning system into GAP's work. And out of that, we were able to develop a curriculum where we integrate girls and good agricultural practices that we call Happy Family, Happy Coffee. And that is the curriculum that we have continued to implement today, wherever we are engaging so that we are able to deal with those issues. Some of the impacts that we have seen with girls have been that we have seen more women being allocated the coffee trees that they can use to access either inputs and other services from the cooperatives and school members. The other benefit is initially village savings and loan associations, which were basically driven by women. Initially was just being seen as women groups, but now we have seen them becoming opportunities where families are able to access funds for financing coffee activities, especially when the payments are delayed or are not forthcoming. These are some of the simple probably impacts I can be able to mention at this minute.
Okay, thank you for this, Peter. So the sound is still not great, but we can hear some, and what we're also going to do is probably share some of the answers that you're providing to these questions as part of the documentation to this webinar afterwards. In any case, could you tell me more also about any particular lessons that you've learned from that work?
Yeah, there are many lessons we have learned from that work, and I'm just going to mention some of the lessons. As Becca had said there before, that the gender action learning system has several tools that assist households to be able to plan for their dreams, for their visions, and what they want to achieve. From the vision journey team, it has come out very strong that every time we are doing it, the provisions are able to identify health as a barrier to achieving some of the personal dreams and therefore needing to be worked on. And it has come to a realization that investing in farmers' health and well-being means reducing the burden of women in giving care to the family and the children and poor health due to the family's resources. Therefore, initiating health and well-being programs in coffee value chain to increase readability, improve coffee quality and quantity. Again, the other lesson learned from our girls' work is from the gender balance tree. Men are, especially when dealing with men, they're able to identify barriers to gender equality. And where they're able to make decisions have had to invest and remove some of these barriers. For instance, I can give a specific probably case where they realize that they need to lessen the burden of women to fetch water or cooking. Whereby they have invested in buying water storage tanks and the construction of structures, and probably to use the burden of fetching firewood, time spent on looking for firewood, the time spent on cooking. Men are more investing now in boundarization or other cooking appliances or equipment that are more energy saving, becoming more conscious and agreeing that by doing that they are removing some of those barriers and making time available for their wives and daughters to be able to do other productive work, like for example, they cannot have time to attend to horticultural gardens where they are able to get extra income.
Okay.
Maybe the other lesson I would say is girls alone on a standby, it is good for it to be integrated with other economic activity. And that is why SMS was able to integrate girls together with girls, because our income generating activities for farmers is coffee. So girls on itself alone really is not enough. It has to be integrated with other economic activities that maybe the family, the producers are doing. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Over to Joyce. We have already heard that land sharing was a particularly interesting feature of the work that you've been doing. So why and how did you promote it within the household? What was really at stake when you did that?
Well, land and labor, two very important factors of production, was an issue. Land access was an issue, and the labor in terms of the know-how and then the reward that goes to women who were so much involved in cocoa production was an issue. Even though women were involved in a lot of the activities in the value chain, they didn't have access to extension services. They didn't have access because most of the requirement to become a member of a farmer association was ownership or access to land, which these women lacked. So what Cookoo did was that they came up with a membership registration policy, which was communicated to the General Assembly some years ago. Men were convinced, because mostly the members were men or male farmers. So they were convinced to see portions of their farmland to their wives so they can register them, and then they become members of the association. So this excluded ownership of the land or transfer of land title. It sounded reasonable to the men. So what they did was, if you have, let's say, 5 acres of land, you could give or register 1 acre in your wife's name, so she becomes a member. And this really helped. What was at stake was the marginalization of women who had become or had low self-esteem. They were paid very little and had little or no access to technical training. So with their low income, that meant they were unable to take good care of their households. And this leads to the cycle of poverty. One thing leads to the other, and on it goes. So this was what we did, and this was what was at stake.
Thank you. That sounds really interesting. We would like to find out more. So can you tell us also a bit about the sort of longer lasting effects? Do you still see some impacts on those women's lives a few years later?
Yes. Well, immediately after this policy, the membership of Cookoo, the female membership shot from 11% to 34%. And there was this aspect of financial empowerment because of the training and then the sensitization that we had with the other farmers, both men and women. It came to a time where the men who had ceded their land to their wives asked them to keep the income they realized from the sale of their produce, which meant that those women were becoming empowered. That aside, because they were members of the association, they had equal access to extension services. So whenever the extension officer was in the community or on the farm, the women could also access them. They received training, not only in agric extension services, but in other services as well. And then they also had access to improved planting materials and the like. That aside, the training that they had built the confidence of the women. So in these communities, we have women groups, women have taken leadership positions, and per the governance structure of Kookoo, we have made it that there is at least a minimum quota of 1 female on the executive. So these are some of the things that is going on currently.
Okay, well, another dimension we'd like to find out about is 2 to 5 years down the line. Do you have any story of any anecdote of any farmer who possibly regretted sharing their land at the moment of registration with their wife? Any anecdote?
On the contrary, the men are excited about that. The policy was one thing, and then the training stroke sensitization was another thing. The men who did this are excited because now the women have been empowered and they have understand a whole lot of things. So the financial burden, which used to be on the men alone, like paying of school fees, building houses, and taking care of all other things, are now shared between husbands and wives. So this has also brought harmony in the homes, because now both men and women can have even fruitful, peaceful discussions at home. And these men are even becoming ambassadors because they have realized the benefits and are trying to talk others into doing same in their communities.
Some growth thinking in action, in demonstration here. So can you tell us what do you consider for you the most important lessons from this experience?
Well, a number of lessons, but I'll talk about 2. The policy, the membership registration policy, which Kookoo formulated and which did the magic. But that alone didn't do the magic, because we know that policy formulation is one thing, communicating the policy is another thing, and then making people to live it is also another thing. So in getting the farmers to live it, we embarked on sensitization. So farmers were sensitized, they received training, we looked for relevant topics, because this has to do with gender. So both men and women, because most of the time when we talk about gender, the men think we are talking about women issues, but we made them realize that it's both men and women. So both of them were given training. They were trained in topics or sensitized in topics like gender, the concept of gender, violence against women, the effects of violence against women on agric productivity, legal literacy, and a host of others. So by doing this, the men had a better understanding of what this whole thing is about. So the policy plus sensitization or training together, that's the trick. And the other lesson is the fact that attitudinal change is required and time must be given. Attitudinal change and time, because these are cultural practices and norms, and you can't use 1 year, 2 or 5 years to even change them. So we need to give time to them. But one thing that is helping in this regard is persistency and consistency. The men have been given initial training, but if you leave them out like that, it ends there. Because we need to see a real change, we needed to be persistent and consistent with the training. So from time to time, those who have received the initial training are given training, just to help them out.
Okay, thank you. As we are interested in the linkages between the cocoa and coffee domains and supply chains, do you think that this approach might work well in the context of the coffee chain?
Yes, I believe it will work well. It will work well because both commodities, coffee and cocoa, are considered a men issue. Women are involved in these commodities, in the production of these commodities. Land is an issue as far as both coffee and cocoa production is concerned. And then the cultural norms and values are similar. So women have issues accessing land in cocoa and coffee. So this can be replicated in coffee as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. Of course, Peter, same question to you. What do you think? Would that approach work in your supply chain?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Joyce, for that response, and especially on the approach on land. Sure, the issue of
Hello, Peter. I think we have lost you, maybe.
So, where men got this thinking that land belongs to them. And so for me, how you arrive at the decision to share land is really, very important. And sometimes it's an emotive issue that means a lot of trust. And trust needs to be built between, first of all, within the household. And again, building trust takes time. And the existing trust may have been as a result of how men and women are socialized. This process of unlearning the socialization takes time, but has to begin somewhere. For us, girls, this is that beginning or starting point, where men and women begin to see their lives differently, not solely on land, but how land is an opportunity to really improve their lives rather than who owns it. That men and women working together, they can be able to achieve more when driven by their vision. That's my reflection on land. That coffee grows on land, and we can be able to change some of the dynamics, especially be able to change how people are socialized, men and women, especially on land issues.
Okay, thank you for this. And talking about the visions and the future, are there any exciting projects that you would like to share with us in this domain?
I don't know whether that would be exciting, but what we are doing at the moment is when we have been engaging women, we have seen a gap in terms of their technical skills and knowledge, and we want to continue building their technical skills and all that. As a coffee marketing company, coffee policy is key. And for us to be able to maximize on quality coffee, then we have to do the right thing with the people who are growing the produce at the farm level, majority of whom are women. So coffee policy in our context is seen by producers and especially those women in Kenya as something that is very far away from them, and therefore not very well understood at the household level or the farm level. And what we're doing now to reverse this kind of trend, because now more women are getting involved in coffee work, we're encouraging them to probably start doing what they call domestic consumption at home. This they do by retaining some of the coffee at home for domestic consumption. By consuming their own, we have started seeing them starting appreciating coffee quality from their own point of view, and even be able to assess damages and defects at the farm level. so that they're able to control quality at that level even before it reaches SMS for marketing. The other project that I've seen getting engaged in is out of our work on gender. I have seen women coming up with very exciting projects. For example, there is a group of women I know which they are trying to integrate coffee production with honey. And in the near future, we're looking forward to offering in the market what we are calling honey coffee, which is produced by women, because they're integrating beekeeping and coffee production at the household. And the bees are pollinating the coffee, and the coffee which is pollinated by bees has better quality, more yield, and has a lot of uniformity. And we hope we'll be able to sell eventually that coffee as honey coffee and getting people who will be interested in that kind of.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this interesting prospects. More about the future with you soon, Peter. I just want to get back to Joyce and find out. There's a number of measures that you have implemented in order to change the rules of engagement. Can you tell us a bit more about another one around the Village Savings and Loans Associations, or VSLAs? Can you give us an example of how they were successful or not?
Well, the VSLAs have been successful, but I would like to say that Kookoo places a lot of premium on impartation of knowledge to its farmers, because knowledge is power, and people have lived, acted, and died in ignorance. So anything that has to do with knowledge, yes, it's a thumbs up for us. That is why, as I mentioned earlier, with the membership implementation registration policy, we came up with the other forms of training to support our farmers. Yeah, we have given training in business and marketing skills to our farmers, especially the women. We have also supported them with farming livelihood activities, so that during the lean season, they will have other things to fall on. That aside, with the implementation of VSLAs, we have implemented VSLAs in about 60% of our farming communities, and this has benefited over 5,000 female and male farmers. One thing we have also done with the VSLA groups is to link them to microfinancial institutions, because the money that they are able to access from their own pool is limited. But with the links from the microfinancial institutions, they are able to access something more than they do. As a result, over the past 15 months, 2,288 cocoa farmers have benefited from a loan of $898,000 US. And it will interest you to know that 58% of this amount has accrued to women. So 58% of the $898,000 US has gone to female farmers. And because of the training that we are giving them in other livelihood activities or ventures, they are able to invest wisely because they have the skills in other areas. Rainforest Alliance and WHO supported us in other activities with respect to child labor project, because the cycle of poverty includes all these things. And based on that, Mars and Ferrero through Coconut is also helping us to set up new VSLA groups. It's something that we have started, and in the next few years, we will continue to set up VSLA groups to assist our farmers. And then our farmers have also received nutritional improvement, because we all know that a sound mind lives in a sound body. So we are giving them training, and we continue to do that. CocoaNext has also supported us in this regard, and other organizations have also supported us in this regard. So these are some of the activities that we are doing to help our farmers, especially the women.
Some exciting and inspiring news indeed, Joyce. Thank you for that. I would like to ask you a final question for this interview, which is, what do you see as the future of the cocoa sector? What worries you, and perhaps also what excites you in this prospect?
Well, climate change. Climate change is affecting the cocoa sector negatively. It's changing the production cycle. It's affecting yield because the flowering is negatively affected. There are little or no rains when it's expected, and there's too much rain when it's least expected. For my fears, is that age-old perception that cocoa is a men's crop, even though that is gradually changing. And the other fear is the ceding of the farmland to women, which might see as a threat by men in our society. And if it happens, I think it will bring a kind of setback in this practice. So that is another fear. And then the fact that our cocoa farms, farmers are aging, and the fact that our crops, both cash crops and food crops, are rain-fed, and we have to think along the lines of irrigation. So these are some genuine fears. The excitement, I would say, due to the effects of climate change, there is a need to incorporate tree planting in our cocoa farms. And currently, the government of Ghana is changing or has changed the laws of tree ownership. Previously, the trees on the farm belonged to the government, but now there is a change. In such a case, women who have access to land or own land have hope, because then knowing that if I plant a tree, and registers it, it becomes mine, the women are going to do more of that. It gives them motivation, and there's hope in the long term. And the other thing is other interventions. These are also exciting. Interventions, because I mentioned aged cocoa farmers as one of the fears. But there are interventions that is roping in the youth. For instance, Solidaridad has made a conscious effort of getting the youth involved in a youth empowerment project in cocoa called Muscle. And this is helping, bringing in a lot of youth into the cocoa sector. And another interesting intervention is the fact that researchers are working around the clock to come up with improved planting cocoa materials, hybrid materials that could be drought resistant, resilient to this climate change issues. And currently there's this cocoa target project where NWO Watro has funded a consortium of partners, including Biodiversity, Cocoa Research Institute of Ghana, KIT, COCOPA, World Cocoa Foundation. It's ongoing, and I believe at the end of the day, one type of cocoa seed will not be, or I would say, will not be one size fits for all. So different ecological zones will have different seeds or seedlings to match up with whichever area that they are. And then the last exciting thing is the fact that gradually the contribution of women in cocoa is gaining attention, unlike previously. So I wouldn't say that this has already translated into money, but I would say that women are gaining the voice. So when it comes to policy formulation and the like, women in cocoa and women who are trying to champion the activities of women are consulted in this regard. And this, I think, is very exciting.
So it sounds like the glass is rather half full than half empty, but with some measures of caution at the same time. Thank you for this, Joyce. Same question to you, Peter, and if possible, would you be so kind to try and keep a short answer so that we have a bit of time for Q&A? Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. What I see of the future of coffee is exactly the same as what Joyce has said. The future of coffee lies in the ability of producers to keep up with the climate change and responsible markets and consumers, relating every coffee bean to how produced and who produces it is important, ensuring food benefits that accrue from coffee trickle down to the person who spends most of the time at it and it just says mostly ensuring the food benefits trickle down to them. Ensures a sustainable future. Again, engaging women in coffee value chain means that we have a diversified coffee crop, meaning that for the coffee environment to thrive, it also depends on other activities that are taking place around the farm. And therefore, they also need to be supported because they supplement the farmers' income. What worries me is too much of the coffee consumed, probably in the north where there are no coffee trees and the climate change. And what excites me is to see the numerous opportunities that the coffee value chain offers men and women to better their lives. That would be my sum.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, for also keeping it short. Again, we will try and post well some of these questions and answers, or this interview questions and answers in the documentation. So now we would like to invite. Well, first of all, again, thank you very much, Joyce and Peter, for sharing your perspectives and experiences around the terms of engagement. And we'll now just invite our participants to share some questions that they might have. So reminding all of you that preferably we would like to see you use the raise hand function, which is located next to the participant in the participants menu at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can find an option to raise your hand. And then when I see some hands raised, I can give you the floor, and then you can also unmute yourself and share your question. And we really invite question rather than comments, so that we really hear back from experiences from Joyce and Peter. If you cannot locate the raise hand option, you can also share your question by chat as an alternative. Right now, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So remember, you can also use the chat window, and usually in Q&A sessions, it only takes a first question to be asked that triggers more reactions and more questions. So we're just waiting for the one brave first question emerging from the floor. Oh, we have a question from an unknown participant called Laven. So please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentations both. I have a question for actually both, but maybe to start with Joyce. Joyce, we see in Ghana there are still many farmers not being organized, and you are an example of having an association where farmers are actually member of a group. Can you share maybe a little bit why is it so important, particularly for women, to also be organized in a way? Thank you.
It's important for women to be organized in that when a group a number of people come together, especially the farmers, knowing that women have been relegated to the background for very long. Coming together makes it easier for them to advocate. It also makes it easier for even any CSO or any NGO to come to their aid. And then by coming together, they need more than just the group bringing themselves and saying that we are a group. Something has to bind them, something has to hold them together. So it's important that they come up with a constitution, something that they will come up themselves. It shouldn't be imposed on them, so that it will help them to own the process. And then with that, there's also the need for a governance structure, because without a governance structure, it also becomes difficult. So the constitution that binds them, and then the governance structure that helps them to channel issues and empowers them.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, while we are waiting for more questions, we're going to okay, so sorry for that. There's too many muting options here. So I was just reading out the comment of Marc-Antoine to everyone, which he has actually shared with everyone anyway, so you can read it. Meanwhile, we have received another question. So coming from Tessa, question for Joyce. Thank you for your inspiring story. Have you also taken additional efforts to engage women in the cooperative that are not married, such as widows? They would not be reached through the land sharing policy.
Yeah, some of our members are widows, or yeah, some of our members are widows. Some of them are just single parents, just the women. And we have some of them in our association. But I can't really say that there's an exclusive association of widows or single mothers in a cooperative, but we have them mixed in our association.
Okay, well, thank you for this. Another question coming from Marc-Antoine, originally for you, Joyce, but I think it actually applies to both of you. Is there an association of women coffee and cocoa producers? And if so, how does it organize itself to advocate for gender mainstreaming in the sector? So maybe you can start with you, Joyce, and then we'll see if Peter has any answer also.
As far as I can say, in Ghana, there isn't an exclusive association of women. They are mixed up. So if I should use Kookoo as an example, we have the general membership. We have groups in communities. But what we have done is that for each group that we have in any community, we also have the women's group, so that the women who belong to the general group come together as a group of women, so they can handle issues that concerns women exclusively and the like. Yeah.
Thank you, Joyce. So, Peter, did you hear the question? Is there an association of women coffee and cocoa producers? And if so, how does it organize itself to advocate for gender mainstreaming in the sector?
Yes, in Kenya we have what we call the Alliance for Women in Coffee, which is a very active and advocacy group for women in coffee. Basically, it is really engaged in women empowerment, whereby most of them are professionals, and they even go up to the grassroots to be able to show the women producers how the opportunities that are there in coffee. Apart from that, in Kenya, all the smallholder coffee farmers are organized in states in which women are free to join. And within the cooperative society, they also form small groups that what we call coffee working groups, basically made up of women.
Okay, so maybe as a result of this project, there will be in the future an association of women coffee and cocoa producers at the same time. Who knows? It would be very nice. We have another question coming from Makiko, and the question is for Joyce. You have mentioned the need of planting trees to be more climate resilient. Who do you rely on for technical assistance? In Ghana, COCOA provides extension, but do you rely on other sources also?
Well, mostly Cocoa Board and then SHED, the Cocoa Health Extension Division. For COCOA, we have agric extension officers, but these ones have been trained by Cocoa Board, and then they provide extension support to our farmers. But mostly it's Cocoa Board, SHED, and the units that work with them.
Okay.
It's because of the importance that Cocoa Board attaches to cocoa and its quality.
Thank you for this answer, Joyce. We still have, I think, a couple of minutes for any additional question from anyone. And we get one from Marc-Antel. What is the relationship between with Ghana Cocoa Board? Can you share with us all any success stories about this?
I think the question is not too clear.
So what is the relationship between COCOA and the Ghana Cocoa Board? Do you have any success story in advocacy, particularly? Marc-Antel is adding.
Well, I'll say Cocoa Board is the regulator. So any cocoa association, organization, I mean, you certainly, the default is you have a link with Cocoa Board. They provide training from time to time. They also make sure that the quality of the cocoa beans that farmers have access to is of good quality. And they make sure that the improved planting materials, especially for cocoa, are sourced through its approved or designated agencies.
Thank you. Thank you for this, Joyce. I'm just looking at both. Okay, well, we have, I think, possibly our final question here, coming from Colleen Phillips. Joyce, I'm in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that has a cocoa industry that is relatively young, 6-7 years. What would be your advice for countries now considering cocoa as a commodity for rural transformation?
Well, as a gender advocate, I would like to say that they should get it right. They should make sure that women are given an important part of this whole process, making sure that they have access to land, even if the country has to come up with a policy, making sure that a percentage of land that is used for cocoa in any district has a percentage given to women. And yeah, you know, so because women do a lot in cocoa production, and you all bear with me that women are meticulous. They pay attention or give attention to details. So if you are now starting, then just give them the right opportunity and then let them do what they know how to do best.
I think you should become an advisor for many of the other countries for introducing these rules. Very good advice you're giving. We have a few more questions, but we won't be able to entertain them in this particular webinar. So what I suggest we do is we take note of...
Anyway, I have one more thing to add. Aside the women, they should also consider the youth. They are the future, so they should not be left out. I mean, we say catch them young. If you catch them young at this time, in 5-10 years time, they'll be going very far.
So good words to close this. Thank you again, Joyce and Peter, for sharing your views and experiences. It's been really, really interesting and inspiring. And as I was saying, we will take note of the questions that are left, and we will basically share them with you, Joyce and Peter, get an answer, and in some way or another, share them over with the rest of the participants. For now, let me hand over to Anna Laven, who will help us close this webinar.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, again, I'd like to thank Joyce and Peter, and also to all the participants sticking on board. I think we can already say it is successful for us. We have more than 50 participants listening in, and only a few dropped out, even while the sound was maybe not always perfect. So thanks a lot. We're really encouraged to continue our journey together. And one of the activities that we will organize in the first quarter of next year will be 2 other webinars. But we want really to decide on the topics of these webinars together, so that you as women and men use your voice to make it the most productive and interesting webinar. With the team, we came up already with 4 proposals, but we also really invite you to come up with your own ideas, and maybe also even with speakers or ideas for case studies. So the topics that you now see on the screen, they're also more elaborated upon in our survey. You can see the link also on this page, on this slide. So we have 4 themes, and one is actually already very closely related to the topic that has been identified as challenge for the future, which is climate change. So that could be a topic for the next webinar to dive deeper into, and maybe also see whether or not certain household methodologies can be helpful to increase climate change resilience at a household level. Another topic could be around living income. Some of you might be aware that in the cocoa and also in the tea sector, actually, there have been quite some developments in terms of identifying what is actually a living income and a living income gap, and also to define strategies, also from a gender perspective, on closing that gap. So we might be able to learn from the experiences in cocoa and in tea for the coffee sector. And third topic could be the feminization of agriculture. Basically, that refers to migration of men from rural communities to the city or even to foreign countries. And what does that mean for women and families that stay behind, and what are potential consequences for cocoa and coffee? A fourth topic could be women and land. Again, this was already raised as a very important topic, also because we had Joyce presenting a study around land, but we think we could even dive deeper and maybe also explore if there are interesting collaborations between organizations that work on women's land rights and that work in the cocoa or coffee value chain. And maybe together we can think about strategies that promote formalization of women's land ownership. Again, these are our ideas coming from the core team, but we welcome your ideas as well. So hopefully you can find your way to the survey. Then as a final slide before closing and thanking again all of you, we want to just make sure that you leave this webinar without sufficient information on how we will continue. So the recordings, including a digital summary, will be put on our project page. This is a project page that you can find on the KIT website. It will not be difficult. And we will also use our social media channels to reach out to you with the recordings, with the summary, etc. So we hope you find all the information you need there. It includes also the publication, of course, for downloading. Having said that, I would really like to close the webinar in a positive spirit, and thanking Joyce again and Peter. I want to thank the whole team for making this happen, and also really thank all of you participants for hanging on, although I see some people are leaving now. So let me just finish up by saying let's stay connected, and we wish you a very wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.